Right. The NHS is safe in UKIP hands. Okay, so Louise is about to dispel all those lies and on those leaflets that have been coming out all last year from the Labour Party. And I'd like to introduce you, Louise Bours.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Special thanks to Michael, obviously, and the Wyre Forest branch for asking me to come down today, and to Jim Carver, Jill Seymour and Bill Etheridge, my fellow MEPs, for inviting me to their region. It's lovely to be here. I'm the new health spokesperson. I was given this brief in August, so I've not had this brief for too long. I'm usually a speaker who likes to do everything without notes, so you will excuse that I have got a few notes in my hand today, because I take this brief so seriously that every time I get up to speak to a room full of people, I want to make sure that everything I say to you is factual and correct, and more importantly, unlike Ed Miliband, I don't want to miss anything out. So that's another reason why I'm going to make sure that I keep glancing at some notes. The health policy is evolving. I've been very lucky to surround myself with a health policy working group which is full of health professionals, people who are working at the coalface in the NHS. And that's what I wanted to do when I took up this position. And I hope what I'm going to say to you now, the things I'm going to explain to you and hopefully clarify for you, will make you see that I take this very seriously. The Health Policy Working Group take this seriously, because this is our health policy, and more importantly, it's your community's health policy. And we want to make sure we get that right. Since its founding in 1948, the NHS, we can all agree, has been hailed as a victory for the working class man and woman. Quality healthcare. It was free at the point of delivery, and it was funded by the taxpayer. Now, 60 years on, it's slightly different. It's changed, hasn't it? It's become a political football. And it's now at the heart of many political debates. And in fact, we've already seen the Labour Party say that they will fight the general election on the NHS. Once it was purely about doing what was best in respect of providing for the health needs of the nation. But since the obsession with data collection, what it now is a barometer of a government's competence. So we have all these dysfunctional targets. They're imposed and they're dropped at a whim, depending on which target is going to suit which government. And that is what is ruining the health service, because it's not improving patient outcomes. So politicians, NHS users, NHS service providers, managers, suppliers, we all have to start asking ourselves what we can do and what part we can play to make it all better, so the NHS is a benefit to us all. But I feel very strongly that the thing that must be at the heart of the NHS is care and compassion. And I think that has been forgotten. And the reason it's been forgotten is because 51% of the people who work in the NHS are bureaucrats. They're not clinically trained. And that, to me, is an absolute disgrace. So, and another statistic, and I hate throwing out statistics, but this is an interesting one, and one maybe for you to remember, those PPCs amongst us. England has the lowest number of doctors per 1,000 people than any country in the developed world. That's how good our NHS is. Frontline workers are demoralised. What we see is we see senior managers, don't we? Senior managers, their pay increases, whilst those who actually work on the front line, our paramedics, our nurses, our doctors, or our clinicians, their pay actually stagnates. And what they see is the growing needs of patients and families ignored. They see the incredible waste of time and money. It's all too evident in the upper echelons of the NHS. Great swathes of time are spent on administration and data collection. Time that should be spent with patients. And that's the important thing. So in the wake of the appalling scandals that we've seen up and down the country at several NHS trusts, UKIP would propose a licence to manage, a GMC, if you would, for managers. Now, clinicians are subject to strict discipline, as we know. We've got the GMC for doctors and we have the NMC for nurses. We think NHS managers should be subject to the same regulation. A licence to manage must be and should be a statutory requirement. Now, if you lose that licence, the removal of that licence would mean that incompetent, negligent or bullying managers could not work anywhere within the NHS. Now, an example of how what wouldn't have happened under a UKIP government, for example, takes to David Nicholson. Now, David Nicholson, he was dubbed a while ago the man with no shame, and he oversaw the regional health authority that was responsible for the appalling disgrace that occurred at Stafford. Now, after that debacle, he was promoted to the chief executive of NHS England. He was promoted. And in 2014, he retired from the NHS on a pension worth £110,000 a year. Okay, that's how good he was. And the chief executive of Stafford, Martin Yates, he walked off with a payoff of just under £1 million. And there wasn't one board member disciplined, not one. And in fact, many of them still work within the NHS in well-paid jobs. Now, UKIP say fundamentally that that is wrong, it is immoral, and under this proposed licensing system, they'd be unable to get any job in the NHS, any job. One of the most popular aspects of the policy I have found since the Doncaster conference is this next policy plank that will be in the manifesto. UKIP will pledge to reinstate the state enrolled nurse. A fundamental thing that we would do. It would utilise the pool of staff at the moment, auxiliary staff, allowing them to train on the ward, in the job, whilst gaining the accreditation. And also it would negate this too posh to wash attitude of some graduates that has been highlighted in many of the scandals up and down the country. As I've said previously, care and compassion must be at the heart of nursing. Matrons. From now on, we're going to define them as nurse managers. Now, these people will have long-term backgrounds and training, and they'll be given back the powers that they've lost under successive Labour and Conservative governments. These nurse managers will be responsible for ward cleanliness, for nurse training and the efficient operations of their wards. Monitor and the Care Quality Commission will be abolished. They'll be replaced instead with local health boards, and we're going to morph these out of the CCGs that currently exist. Now, these boards will inspect health services. They can also take evidence from whistleblowers, and importantly, these members of the health boards will be professional clinicians, people working within the NHS, people who know what their community needs. Health professionals, not politicians. That is the important thing. They're going to bring local democratic control back to all local health decisions directly affecting the community. So that would mean, for example, here in Kidderminster, your hospital wouldn't have been downgraded to a minor injuries unit, forcing unbelievably 100,000 people to undertake a 14-mile trip to the nearest A&E department. I mean, that's utterly outrageous. Our passionate belief in UKIP, it's all about localism. Localism, local referenda and local democratic control. It means you, the people, the community have a say. Because as far as I can see at the moment, the wishes of people, of patients, of the electorate are completely and utterly ignored. That has got to change. Now, Britain has long been a destination for those who wish to work and prosper. We've been a haven, haven't we, for those in need or in danger, and this we should continue. We should be very proud of this legacy. However, the Westminster elite and the Lib Lab Con seem to have forgotten one thing. It is the National Health Service, our National Health Service, not the International Health Service. And now these are the government figures. These are not my figures. The government estimate, so you can bet your bottom dollar that I'm sure it's a lot more, that £2 billion every single year are lost through health tourism. £2 billion. Now, what British visitors, all of us here as tourists, as visitors, we routinely purchase medical insurance, don't we, when we go to other countries? Routinely, it's something that we do automatically. So why shouldn't we expect the same as students and migrant workers and visitors to this country? Why? Why shouldn't we? What is unfair about that? So UKIP are going to ensure that all migrants and visitors have NHS approved health insurance as a condition of entry to this country.
You're here.
But our universal health service, I mean, lots of people look at this. It makes us the envy of the world in lots of respects. But we must ensure, however, that the system is fair to those who actually pay into it and contribute to it, and that's the British taxpayer, fundamentally. So visitors and migrants must meet a minimum health insurance requirement. It works in the USA, they do it in Canada, they do it in Australia, they do it in numerous other countries. So it's got to work in Britain too. It's got to. What I would also like to see is the monitoring of this scheme through the visa application process. Because there's no way that we should be burdening our primary care providers with checking if people have got relevant insurance. It would be very, very simple to do. When visitors, students, migrant workers apply for a visa, they must also apply for or demonstrate the existence of health insurance. As simple as that. And we can put details of health insurance providers displayed alongside the visa information. So in accordance with the Australian model, for example, and the American model. And also in accordance with the Australian model, all visitors and migrants must meet a minimum health standard too. You know, again, it's a fundamental thing that we have to deal with. Today we launched what the Wire Forest are instigating. It's a petition about hospital car parking charges. We were at the hospital today having our photograph taken. Lots of cars are driving past and all peeping their horns and waving at us. We had lots of support. And I have to say, hospital car parking charges is one of the most contentious issues for patients and relatives alike. I mean, their very existence and the fact that people are arbitrarily charged whilst they're at the most vulnerable makes patients and family and friends understandably furious at this terrible lack of compassion and understanding. So UKIP would commit to spending 200 million of the 2 billion saved through cutting health tourism to end hospital car parking charges across England. And we're the only party to the plan. Now, the Working Time Directive is more regulation and red tape from Brussels, and this directive has a negative impact upon the training of our doctors. So a task force was set up, and it was headed by Professor Norman Williams. And Norman Williams is a former president at the Royal College of Surgeons, and he concluded that the creation of a protected education and training time has to be explored because of the detrimental effect that Working Time Directive has on our doctors. He wants to see a separation of training and education, which would ensure that training time is not working time and therefore not included in the 48-hour limit. Now, at present, individual doctors cannot opt out of the 48-hour restriction placed upon them by the EU. However, many junior doctors are completely unaware of this. So UKIP would ensure the wider use of that right for individual doctors is encouraged. And we're going to continue to fight for the amendment of that directive that absolutely prevents our clinicians from working and training effectively. Now, there's been much misinformation. I get tackled about it all the time. Whenever I do anything in the media, I get several things always thrown in my face. And one of them is how all I want to do is privatise the entire NHS. That's the only thing I ever get asked at the moment. But it is changing. Because that's out there because of the misinformation and propaganda that has been put out there by the Labour Party. They've distributed literature, I've seen it, claiming that we would charge people to see their GP. And they claim that we would privatise the NHS by bringing in private companies to deliver services. Well, obviously, excuse me, Mr. Miliband, but he's obviously forgotten that it was under the Labour government that they supported and continue to support the PFI, the private finance initiatives. Yeah. And Mr. NHS himself, Andy Burnham, the self-proclaimed saviour of the NHS, presided over I've completely forgotten the figure, but I've just found it there. You see, this is why we have notes. Presided over 221 PFI contracts. Blimey. And yet he'll sit on a show and he will sit there in his saintly manner and tell everyone how he fights the NHS and how we want to the audacity and the hypocrisy of the Labour Party when it comes to the NHS is utterly incredible. And this is one of those, this is the misinformation that we have to fight against continually. By the time they've run the course, the Treasury estimate that £300 billion will have been spent on PFI agreements. 300 billion. That's 10 billion a year by 2017. Now that figure could have been used to transform the NHS, it really could. But instead, the agreements have benefited just one group of people, private shareholders, that's it. And hedge fund managers who invested in these PFI agreements. Labour privatised the NHS under our very noses, and don't you dare let any Labour activist or supporter tell you otherwise. And when they try to say that, you now have the ammunition to go and fend off and argue against that. They are lying. Plain and simple, okay? You must pull them up on that every single time. When they start banging on about UKIP, privatising the health service, you know, you as activists must remind them that it was Labour members, Lord Winston and Lord Warner, who publicly stated that people should be charged £200 to see their GP. This is all a matter of public record, that's a Labour peer, okay? Or alternatively, if £200 to see a GP was a little too much, then we should all pay £120 a year as like a joining fee, as a club fee. That was the other bright idea. So don't you let any Labour activist ever put you off your stride, okay? They are lying, the Labour Party, to their own activists. I don't believe the activists are bad people. They are being told what they are being told to say what these things by the people above, okay? They don't know any better. You must educate them and show that what they've been told is utter rubbish. The work of the NHS, we know, is carried out by dedicated doctors, nurses, hospital staff, etc. And it's an insult, an absolute insult, for the grey-suited men in the Labour Party to claim that they somehow are the people who keep this all ticking over. The truth is, the NHS works in spite of Labour, okay, not because of Labour, even though that's what they'd like us all to think. UKIP will ensure that the NHS remains free at the point of delivery and of need. A two-tier national health service will never be acceptable, never, where those who have money to pay for enhanced services, you know, that will never be acceptable. And that is another line that you need to make sure you have in your heads. We support that principle. We will protect that principle. We are there to protect the NHS. Okay? We all have to, all of us sitting in this room, we all understand, don't we? Things have to change. We know that. You know, things have to change. We've an ever-ageing population, you know, so we have to find new and innovative ways in order to maintain standards of care, the care and the delivery of care that we've come to expect. But it's my assertion that it is not the paramedics or the healthcare workers or the nurses or the doctors that we need to look to shoulder this burden. Instead, we should be looking to the plethora of managers that exist within the NHS. You know, incompetent managers who shrug off responsibility to committees and regulatory bodies. Control via committee, like we have at the moment, is inefficient. It's completely inefficient. NHS managers have to take personal responsibility for all of their decisions. They must be judged on their successes and their failures, not on their ability to avoid blame, which is what seems to happen at the moment. We can all remember, can't we, the plight of that little boy, Aisha King. You know, we all saw that in the news, didn't we? That little boy where his parents fled with him from a British hospital and took him abroad to get the proton therapy that he needed to treat his brain tumour. And it was absolutely, and as a mum, you know, I have 2 little girls, and for all, it's shocking, wasn't it, on lots of different levels. But not least because a child was having to go to another country in order to obtain life-saving treatment, you know, that wasn't available here in Britain. You know, these NHS managers must get their priorities right. They must. Well, undoubtedly, I'm sure that if the public had a choice between the NHS equipping itself adequately in order to treat children like Aisha and the numerous other children currently forced to go overseas for treatment, or the NHS spending approximately £90 million every year on gastric band and breast enhancements, then I'm pretty sure what the British public would choose. Okay? We could treat all of those children for less than 1/10 of what we spend on gastric band and breast enhancement surgery each year. That, you know, all those children. No children dying without waiting. No families desperately attempting to raise funds before time runs out. There's no question as to whose treatment should be a priority. The managers need to look at those statistics and they need to make sure that they make the right decisions. Now, the TTIP. Now, TTIP, for those of you who haven't heard of that, it's an acronym. It's short for the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And TTIP is a European Union and United States trade deal, and it's been negotiated as we speak. In fact, it was mentioned when we were sitting in the plenary session in Strasbourg this week. Now, the inclusion of medical, health and dental provision within the TTIP agreement, it is truly a serious threat. It really is. I can't emphasise that enough. TTIP is there for the benefit of one thing only. And as Jim mentioned before, it is big business. That is it. That's the only people who benefit from the TTIP, big business. And Latvia, the country who is taking over the revolving presidency of the European Council, this week confirmed, again we heard it in this plenary session in Strasbourg, that one of its objectives was to ensure that the TTIP agreement was finalised by the end of this year. Now, UKIP always vote against these kind of deals anyway, because obviously we believe passionately that we should be making our own trade deals and not leaving these things to European bureaucrats. However, whilst this is ongoing, we have to ensure that the NHS is excluded from the agreement. It's absolutely vital. The NHS is about our welfare. It cares and it protects the people of this country, and it should not be an article in a trade agreement between the European Union and the United States of America. You know, we have to fight, and I think for the first time ever, we are actually going to fight alongside Unite and Len McCluskey, who has written to all the health spokespeople in the major political parties, asking if they would pledge to vote against TTIP. You'll be interested to learn that only I and UKIP have actually responded and said that we will fight alongside him to ensure So we do have a fight on our hands, folks, and you as activists, as maybe would-be activists, I don't know, council candidates, Our lovely PPC here, Michael. You know, we do have a fight on our hands. I'm not going to joke. You know, I'm not going to joke with you. It's the NHS is a tough one to sell. We've got lots of fences we're going to have to jump, because the Labour Party have done a good job at disparaging us and spreading their lies. So we have a fight. The Labour Party will continue, I am sure, to lie to their grassroots support. But with our help, my help, the help of your other MEPs, and with the policy I'm going to put together for you, I hope you can fight back. You can show voters that we are the party. We will acknowledge the problems. We will. We're going to fight the bureaucracy. We're going to end the culture of taking out whilst never having put in. And we're going to be the only party who always will put the British public first. And that I can promise you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.